So, as mentioned, I am so excited to have Anita here with us today to talk about trauma-informed approaches for employee and employer well-being. Obviously, as the Lioness community, uh, I'm sure a lot of you are very interested in how to support your teams, but it's also important to be able to support yourself. Now I'll turn it over to Anita.
Thank you, Laura. So I am so grateful to be here. I love this community so much and I get so much out of it. And so I'm excited to be able to give back, especially at this important time. Um, Part of that giving back, if you are an HR professional, this webinar has been pre-approved by HRCI for one credit hour towards recertification. So if you scan the QR code and if you guys could drop the link in for them, if you sign up for that, I will get your certificate and it has the code number and everything. So I'm really excited to be able to offer that. And what I'd like to do first, because we are talking about some challenging things as part of this hopeful conversation, is I'd really like to ground us in the safety of this space that Lioness and the team create for us. But there are some discussions around some things that might affect you. So I want to make sure, one, that we're grounded, and two, if you are feeling uncomfortable, please step away. Please do what you need to take care of yourself. As Laura mentioned, as leaders, we not only have to be trauma informed for others, but we have to take care of ourselves as well. So what I'd love for you to do is plant your feet really squarely on the floor, really ground yourself into your space. If you feel comfortable, put your hand on your heart and one on your stomach, whatever makes you feel best connected. And we're just going to do 3 deep breaths. So ready, we're going to breathe in and hold it at the top and let it out. Let go of everything that's, going on in your day and just really center in your safety. We're going to breathe in again and hold 3, 4. Let it all out. And one more time. I don't know about you guys, but that felt great to me. You'll find I made a few changes this morning because I was really impacted by Bobby's newsletter. So I'm even myself maybe a little off because I really wanted to address her important topic today. But what we're talking about today can seem really daunting, but there is a lot of hope and positivity around this. I call it the 1 + 1 = 3. When we are doing this, we're supporting the worker, the workplace, and the world. And I want to start with what we can gain by doing this work in these trying times. I truly believe that when we create safer and more sound spaces, we impact not only our people and profits, but the planet. And sadly, we're seeing that the opposite is true as well. All we had to do was see Bobby's newsletter this morning about Tribe being canceled. The ripple effects we are seeing of unsafe, unsound, unkind, diminishing practices of a few people are impacting many. When something gets canceled like that, it is not just a click of a button. It is costly, it is painful, it hurts people. But more importantly, Bobby's words really resonated with me. Are we permissible? For those of us who have been impacted by certain types of trauma, like myself, we ask ourselves these questions every single day, sometimes every single minute of every day, especially when the events and environments around us work diligently to tell us we're not. Even this morning, I was asking myself these questions, especially because words around my work and who I am are on the list of banned things: female, equity, trauma. We are trying to move away from these words at the time when things like trauma informed care and equity are more important than ever. Yet, despite this great need, most organizations fall in the middle of my safe and sound continuum. They're trauma affected. They're completely unaware that trauma is impacting them. They don't see how trauma and work have any intersection. But as I just mentioned, we are seeing clearly that there's not only organizations and institutions who are aware or maybe unaware and doing great harm in recreating, negating, or not caring about their people and trauma, but based on the current state of affairs in many places, trauma weaponizing is in full effect. We're seeing this play out in corporate and government layoffs, shock and awe, confusion and chaos, the negation of whole concepts and people, and the devastating ripple effect that that has on our identities, our families, our communities. We're seeing it in the world at large. I see this every day right now as the partner of a federal employee and the constantly activated trauma response we're experiencing in our household. And the costs are hurting our people, our profits, our planet. Again, you'll hear me say this a lot because the ripple effect is tremendous. So I'm curious, real quick, where do you see your organization or your client organizations on this continuum? Drop a note in there for me, and I'd love to hear if you are farther on the healthy end, on the skilled, sensitive, responsive. Do you have policies in place around this, or is it just kind of embedded in your culture? Um, and do you understand the significant number of people? So I'm going to look at a couple of notes here. Um, Severe trauma and coach privately for 14 years. And oh, thank you, Heather Ann. Resistant. Oh, thank you, Amy. That means so much. Apathetic. Okay. I often think that these are not because the people are bad people. I'll talk about this, although we do see that. I think it's truly a lack of understanding of how this shows up. Um, and I know this not just because of what I've seen, but because recently I polled 500 HR leaders at an event I was speaking at on this topic. Um, Alexandra, this is a scale that I've developed based on trauma-informed Oregon's and Minnesota's 4-part scale that started from trauma affected or trauma unaware, trauma sensitive, trauma responsive, and trauma informed. For me, it was much deeper than that. There were more nuances and layers. And especially in our corporate lives, there were things that I was actively seeing that did not get addressed in more of those nonprofit sides of things. So I'm nervous about that too, but together, Amy, we can make a difference on the mental health toll. But those 500 leaders that I spoke to, I asked them the same question I asked you. Do you have policies and procedures in place to support the significant number of people in your organization who are trauma impacted? And not one of them had even considered why they should do that. So if you're on those lower levels, you're not alone. In fact, I often hear people say, I've never even thought of that intersection. People who are doing incredible social impact work even have not considered this intersection between work and our humanity. And there's a lot of reasons for this, including we are a culture that says, check your humanity out the door, which we'll talk about in a minute. I've also heard, and we're seeing this with the banned words, but I've had a gentleman tell me when he commented on my work that my work was corrosive. It was potentially problematic. I thanked him for the title of my next book because it's a great title for my memoir. Potentially Problematic, the Anita Roach story is exactly what I've been seen as for a long time. So, but by not seeing the connection and not working to create safe and sound environments, we are losing so many positive impacts. The impacts when we create safe spaces are incredible. For the worker, the well-being benefits are substantial. A 41 increase in health and well-being. That includes a 40% reduction in chronic illness. And to the point that Amy made about the mental health toll, when we create these environments, we see a 62% lower burnout rate. And burnout is so prevalent right now. We're talking about this all the time. And I truly believe the cause of burnout is not having a firm foundation and constantly activated trauma response. For our organizations, research from Gallup and others prove that building trauma awareness and allowing whole humans into the workplace is also significant. Businesses can see a 75% higher employee engagement rate, a 30% reduction in healthcare costs, in part because of the reduction in chronic illnesses, and a 45% increase in productivity. These are the things we need to be thinking of when we're talking about more efficiency and more effectiveness in our organizations. When we focus on safe and sound practices and cultures, we reduce a lot of problematic things and we increase the most important parts of it. The 1+1 of this, the worker and the workplace, creates impacts that ripple through our world. Our families, there's stronger local economies, there's reductions in crime, and most importantly, we're not perpetuating childhood trauma because we do not leave work at home at the office any more than we leave our personal lives at home when we get into the office. So we're bringing this home, and we need to stop this cycle for future generations, because as you'll hear in a minute, they are really being impacted. And despite what many people think and how they're acting, trauma is universal. It impacts every single one of us. It is just part of our human condition. We watch events on the news every morning. We see post after post on social media. We know what's happening to us personally and to our coworkers and the people we care about. And one thing none of us escape is the traumatic experience of loss and grief. It would be nice to, but we don't. And then sadly, there's those of us who are more susceptible: women, people of color, LGBTQ, neurodivergent and disabled populations. But certain events affect all of us. Trauma is not a respecter of person or privilege. And we'll talk about this in a minute, but I often hear this isn't a priority because it only applies to a couple of people. And that, you will find, is not true, and the research shows otherwise. And how each of us handles these universal events is unique to each of us. It's who we are genetically in our inherent design. It's our lived, nurtured experiences that are not always nurturing, and how our brains uniquely process information. And from this, we develop our story, our strengths, and our skills. Sadly, in our workplaces, most organizations only want us for our skills. And again, we do not check these other parts at our door, despite what they want from us and our best efforts, because we've learned to protect ourselves there as well. When we do this, when we allow all three parts of this, and we allow the whole human, their self-acceptance, their self-esteem, and their self-efficacy grows, in turn, creating benefit for the organization. But our systems that only want these skills are missing out on the strengths that are born of our challenges and of our trauma. Creativity is a great example. Creativity is key to innovation. We hear this all the time: innovation, innovation, innovation. And we'll see in a moment that, sorry, I got distracted by a comment. I just want to make sure I didn't miss something. But When we are not trauma informed, innovation decreases because active trauma response impacts our brain function and our ability to create. Furthermore, most trauma survivors, while they're incredibly brave, they balance that with the other strengths to make them sound risk takers. And I just realized it skipped one. So give me a second. There we go. Trauma survivors have incredible perspective. And it's a unique perspective because we've learned to assess situations quickly, to not take things at face value. And this perspective in healthy environments that'll allow for it gives an organization clarity, really right sized and appropriate solutions, and it creates real foundation for action. Additionally, trauma survivors understand people. We are, and I keep saying we, and you'll hear a little bit about my story in a minute, but trauma survivors are innately intuitive and understand how people respond and what their motives are. And they are highly empathic, empathetic, and they create cooperation in our teams. And they create action because they see difficult things through to the very end as long as they make sense because they do have a tempered approach. They're so goal oriented and they always have a plan in place and 12 backup plans, which right now we need more than ever. So they create the plans that create our success. But it's not just trauma survivors who have this. And you'll see in a minute that I really do believe most of us, in some way, shape, or form, are trauma survivors. We all have these 24 character strengths within us. And because we're human and we have innate involuntary trauma response, the safety of our environments impacts our access to those as well. So really quick, I want to stop because that was a lot and a lot of heavy stuff. So I want to do a little fun conversation. So one, if you're interested in winning one of the strength stacks, I'm trying to see if I have one handy. I don't. These strength stacks are a great tool for our teams, but also for us as leaders to help build our strengths. So if you're interested in winning one, please use the QR code or the link Suzanne just dropped and sign up. And then I'd love to answer any questions, read the comments that have popped in, and also see what strengths you think are you're seeing yourself.
Awesome. Yes, we have some questions coming in already. So this is for a bit of clarification. What do these stress indicators, strategies, and strength training mean? Or maybe you'll be getting to that later.
Um, can you repeat that really quick?
Yep. So I think it's just asking for some clarification on the stress indicators you've mentioned, different strategies, and strength training.
Okay,
Um,
why am I not seeing this? What do they mean for the organization? For the organization, it means some of those positives we brought up. For our employees and ourselves, as we develop these strengths, as we shore ourselves up, we get to bring that into the office. The policies that we put into place for creating these things, which we'll talk a little bit more in a few minutes, create the foundation, the soil from which all the other well-being programs and policies and stuff take root. And so I hope that answered it.
yeah, I believe it was the content on the previous slide. It's from
Oh,
what
okay.
people are letting me know.
Um, Oh, yes. Oh, I see. On the actual content of the cards. Yes. So the stress indicators, each strength has um its norm, its center point, right? When we're at our best, for example, for social intelligence, at its center point, that person who has that strength is adaptable, insightful, empathetic. Um, but they can be overused and underused, especially when trauma is triggered. So each of the strengths has these. So a person with social intelligence can become overbearing or seem a little arrogant because they think they know things that other people don't, which they often do. They can lack a little depth because they've shut down and they don't want to use that strength. Strategies for success are, if this is one of your top strengths, these are ways that you can make sure you're putting it in place. And then the strength training on each card is, if this is one of your lesser strengths, because again, we all have all 24 of these. These are the via character strengths from the VIA Institute, who have given me permission to use their classification. But this is all my content and research. Strength training is, if this is one of your lesser strengths, there's ways for you to build that up to help you. I don't love this word. I think we're overusing it right now, but help you build the resilience you need to bring that forward to yourself. Yes, sorry. I probably should have left that one off, but if there were questions, I wanted to have it on my screen to make it available.
Yes.
And so did everybody get a chance? Is anybody resonating with any of these strengths? Are they like, that is me? Or, ooh, I'd really love to build that one up a little bit.
Think so. We're seeing a lot of engagement in chat and people who are,
Great. I just want to make
yeah.
sure I'm not missing anything. And Alexandra, we'll talk a little bit about this. I'll hopefully try to share a little bit um, on some of the things and how change management is important and how we address change management, including our candidate experience, our onboarding, our offboarding is all very important. So with that, I think I'll move on if that's good with everybody. So I talked about the significant number. I'm curious as to what percentage of our workforce you think is contending with some level um, of traumatic past, what types of trauma you think they're experiencing. There's any notes in there? Okay, Erin says 40. We'll go there because I 95, more than 50. Yep. Oh, I love that. Fairness is also actually one of the strengths for time and space. Fairness is the sixth one on my list because when people have been poorly treated, they often work very hard to create fairness in their lives for other people. So I love that, Suzanne. The truth is, the most current studies, which happened, I want to say in 2022, say that 70% of adults have experienced at least one traumatic event. Now, obviously, post-pandemic and in current times, I think Kim's number is closer. I actually believe it's 100%. On top of that, newer research shows that 1/3 of us have 4 or more adverse childhood experiences that lead to increased physical and mental health risks. That number has jumped almost 15% in the last few years. And we'll talk about why I think that is in a minute. And then 7% of us, like myself, have been diagnosed with PTSD or complex PTSD. So as you can see, this is not a couple of individuals. This is the majority of our employee bases. And one of the challenges we face around talking about trauma, besides fear, shame, and stigma, because we don't like to talk about uncomfortable things, is for years, for decades, for centuries, we believe that combat was the only thing that caused trauma or post-traumatic stress disorder. It was reserved for our esteemed veterans who, by the way, even if they don't see active combat, are subjected to very traumatic events in their training, etc. And so it shows up everywhere. And that does impact their children, their families, their communities, their work. But we have other types of trauma that shows up. Community trauma, the pandemic is an example of that. Cultural trauma, including religious trauma, racial and gender trauma, which are huge topics right now. And so creating discomfort in many, many people. We have climate trauma, which we are seeing a lot of, the fires, the hurricanes, secondhand trauma from the caregivers through all of these, obviously childhood trauma, and then we have the crisis trauma of, say, a car accident, all which are traumatic events that can happen to any of us. Again, it's not a respecter of privilege or person. And so this is just the main parts of it. And then, of course, there's secondary and vicarious trauma, survivor's guilt, all kinds of things that make this very complex. And then there's the intersectionality that I mentioned related to gender, race, neurodivergence, disability, both seen and unseen, sexuality, and more. Trauma, even at its simplest, is complex, personal, and a very real part of our human experience. So with that, I like to share a little bit about my story, and how it has shown up in my work and my life, and why we need to try to be thoughtful to these things, and how our younger generations will have even more of this. So childhood trauma is affecting 1/3 of us, and it's a large part of my story. I lost my mom. Sorry, I get a little emotional. I lost my mom to her 2-year cancer battle when I was only 8 years old. And this set off a very long and painful trauma story. It included emotional, verbal, mental, and sexual abuse. I got blamed for everything. When we talk about that, are we permissible? As we're having these conversations and these thoughts around our permissibility, if we were the scapegoat in our family, if we were blamed for things, if we were parentified, a lot of that will continue to show up in our lives. I was blamed for my stepmom's relapse. I was blamed for my own abuse. Um, and it showed up in a lot of ways. And that's just the very top line stuff, because this is not a meeting for why Anita is the way she is. But these things explain, one, why I'm so passionate about this work and why I know the ins and outs of it, not just from a research or a practitioner standpoint, but from a real lived experience. But it's also important, as I said, to address this incoming workforce and their childhood trauma. Our young people today, before we even look at their home lives and their interpersonal relationships, most likely have 4 of those adverse childhood experiences. They were children in the pandemic and everything that comes along with that. They have the negative impacts of social media, increased bullying, increased exposure to predators. I have heard some heartbreaking stories lately. Climate change, increased food and housing insecurity, increased social unrest. And here in the States, and I think that's where most everybody is, our children have active shooter drills in their schools beginning at 5 years old. This is impacting them before we even look at, is our mom and dad healthy? What is mom and dad's stress level? Do they have enough food? Do they have enough housing? Are they female? Are they LGBTQ? Are they trans? Are they a person of color? Are they autistic or ADHD? All of that, which increases their impacts. And so we've got to look at this because it is affecting the bottom line as well. We can pretend it's not. And despite the belief that this generation is lazy, I believe they are simply an activated trauma response from unhealthy educational systems and workplaces that mimic their childhoods. So over 1/2 of young people today are reporting that they've experienced serious trauma. 43% of these people say they are not living fully. 43%. And that's before they've hit full adulthood. And sadly, almost 1/4 of them have had suicidal thoughts. And they are bringing this into the world and the work they live in. They also do not accept mistreatment. They speak out about it and they name it and they claim it and they call it. Yes, because they are in fight, quite honestly. I think it is fight. They are less likely to be fawners because our cultural and societal norms have changed a bit. And so, um, yes, Heather Ann. And so the anger, the unwillingness, the putting their feet, planted firmly in the ground and being unmoving is often because of active trauma response, I believe. So, how does trauma show up in our organizations? It shows up in a lot of ways, like we were just talking about. Um, the four main trauma responses, some we've heard of, some we might not know as well: flight, fight, freeze, and fawn. Um, the the fighter, right, that we just talked about, they can be aggressive, obstinate, maybe. They can be constant complainers. It doesn't always have to be super aggressive. It can be the person who just, um, the negative Nancy, we'd call it. We have the person in freeze who might be a procrastinator, or they just don't seem like they're participating. Flight, obviously, they call in sick maybe more than others. They take more breaks than are allowed. They have a lot of panic and anxiety. They're overthinkers. And then the fawner, which is a relatively new discovery in the last little over a decade. Um, the fawner is the appeaser and pleaser. So they are overachievers, workaholics, perfectionists, chronic people pleasers, might be named Anita. Fawning is my default trauma response. I also think it's most of ours in the workplace because we need a paycheck and we cannot flee the scene or fight back for fear of losing our jobs. Organizations tend to love fawners. They love them right into health crisis and that high burnout we talked about. And we praise fighters often as strong leaders. We see that a lot. And we put fleers and freezers on PIPs because of productivity issues. But at the end of the day, this is all activated involuntary autonomous physiological nervous system response to unhealthy spaces and perceived threat. These are not emotional impulses or bad behavioral choices, despite what people think. And the most common parts of our work can trigger these things. I don't use trigger often. You'll hear me say activated because society's kind of co-opted our trauma language. We say things like, oh, her outfit gave me PTSD, or that side eye really triggered me. No, it didn't. These are real psychology terms that are in the DSM, but yet we use this all the time. So I tend to use the word activate, but these triggers can be as simple, like, know those common things that are just kind of random are not probably triggering your PTSD. Although the woman's outfit, if it was the last thing that your abuser was wearing, could be a trigger. But in our workplace, these things are lack of role clarity, um, lack of boundaries, exclusion and unfairness, mismanaged change. These simple things that we see every day um, are things that can be felt as perceived threats. And the good news is we can mitigate these through simple things. But when we don't, the costs are tremendous. We see chronic illness, sleep disorders, impaired decision making, memory and focus issues. We see relational issues both in our teams and in their homes. We see emotional dysregulation that affects physical, mental, spiritual well being. And our employees have lost opportunities for growth and career advancement. On the organizational side, the numbers are outrageous. The cost of this trauma insensitivity is 20% at least reduction in productivity. I think that number right now is higher. 40% increased turnover rates, 30% decrease in innovation because people are afraid to take risks for fear of punishment, 43% more sick days than in safe companies, which equates to $300 billion annually in burnout claims, short-term disability, and increased use of employee assistance programs. $58,000 in claims related to psychological safety claims. And Gallup says overall, this is costing, this lack of engagement, which again, I believe is trauma impacted, is costing us $8.8 trillion in lost profit annually. So it is not a small amount of money that these simple things can really help us affect. But again, there is hope. I am a hope peddler. And so it is one of my top strengths, despite everything I've been through. And you will find a lot of trauma impacted people who are that way. And it doesn't have to be overwhelming. And it doesn't have to happen all at once. In fact, moving from like that initial glimmer of awareness to like the numbers, like the wake up call piece of this, into immediate action, which is our cultural norm, is actually quite trauma inducing for all of us. So a measured approach is really important, which we'll talk about in a moment. So what can we do? I've developed 7 agreements that I believe are the foundation of a safe and sound workplace. These don't require major infrastructure changes, outlays of capital, really much more than expecting our leaders and employees to be good people at their cores, because trauma informed is human informed. So again, we don't have time to go through everything, but these 7 agreements are the foundation for us. So what I'd love to do right now is you scan the link or scan the QR code or jump in the link. There's a brief 3-question, I believe, for each of the 7 agreements, a self-assessment that you can do. And while you guys respond to that, I'd love to answer any questions or address any comments.
Yes, absolutely. So we have a fantastic question. It's a little bit long, so let me know if you
Okay.
need me to repeat anything.
Okay.
I've been reflecting on how trauma is often perceived, and I'm curious about your thoughts. Is trauma ever seen as a spectrum? It seems that people often approach trauma from a place of judgment, focusing on the extent or level of it, rather than approaching it with curiosity or acceptance. This can make it harder for individuals to process or share their experiences. Um, I'm also wondering how this plays into the concept of trauma dumping and how we can better navigate these conversations in a way that acknowledges everyone's unique experience without judgment. What's your perspective on this?
Yes, I love that. So in 2 slides, we're going to address some of this. It is, of course, there are spectrums of this, right? I mean, the person who has never experienced even a loss, let's say they're a 30-year-old, I'm not picking on white men, but just because they're not in the thing, a 30-year-old white man with both parents living who have never been divorced, things have been pretty steady. They still have the inherent involuntary physiological aspects of our brain and body that any event could throw him into a trauma response. So we all have it. And then there's others who are more sensitive because of the events they've experienced. Um, the problem is we've got to stop treating this, in my opinion, like it's a dirty word. I get told often, if you want to be successful, Anita, you should change. You should not say trauma. Um, that's not going to happen. I'm going to say it trauma, 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 because we must break the silence around this. We must tell our stories. We must take away the sting and the stigma um, around this. And we must shine a light on the power of our humanness that comes from the human condition. We are all here on the spinning planet for a reason, experiencing these things. So, but I do think there's things we can do. I call it the compassionate why, and we're going to talk about it in just a moment. So I hope that's answered the question.
Yes, I would say so.
Okay.
I have another question here. Um, how can I check in with myself to make sure that I'm not causing any problems from a place of my own trauma?
That is a great question. Yeah, trauma is not an abstract word. It is an actual real phenomenon. I am sorry that people are telling you this or trying to shut down your conversation. People are uncomfortable about these things, so uncomfortable. And that's part of why I work really hard to share this information, because we're all experiencing it, and again, more than normal. To your question about how can I check in, and then also to the question about what do I find most important, um, is two things: being cognizant and upholding accountability. So while they're all important and I selected each one very specifically, being cognizant and having clearly defined expectations of what is appropriate behavior, both for yourself and in the policies and procedures of your organization, is very important. And it's a no cost shift. So rules around things like body positioning, tone, voice, language can make a world of difference. I tell a story often. I used to work in very male dominated industries, and I have had 6 male leaders standing over my desk, voices raised, demanding me to give in to unreasonable requests for even more work, despite working 80 hours a week. They were not taking my no seriously. And while these were all very good, kind human beings who are often under pressure for quotas and goals, and they see employees more as producers than humans, which is a systemic issue in our world and especially in our country. Being cognizant of those little things and how that might be perceived, because for them, they were just trying to do what they had to do for the business. For me, as a sexual abuse survivor and the one half of women and one third of men who have experienced sexual violence, this is just another example of our no not being meaning no. And it really can feel like a threat. It can feel like the same scenario, even though they're quite different. Our brain can't process the difference. The feelings are the same. And so when the person shuts down, um, and there's, she's too emotional, he's this or whatever, understanding that sometimes the shutdown, the pull away, even the willingness to change their mind and take on the work is really the active trauma response. The other, which is very important to this, and just you asking that question shows that you do this for yourself. um, uh, Oh, great. I would love that, Alba. Is upholding accountability around these policies and procedures. If we allow it, if we, for ourselves, many leaders don't have the right check-in points with their people who are willing to tell them the truth if they've overstepped, but also for our other leaders, our employees, etc. We must not let some people get away with it and some people not. Um, Oftentimes trauma survivors never saw their perpetrators or the things that hurt them brought to justice. So when you are not upholding accountability by having clear policies and procedures that apply to everybody, you are perpetuating that cycle. And you're decreasing trust and safety, which is impacting your bottom line. So to that compassionate why, one of the simplest things I say we can do for anything when we suspect somebody might be responding from a place of trauma or is just having a bad day is start with the compassionate why. Internally, ask yourself, is there something at play that you don't know about? Not making assumptions, questioning our assumptions. And to the person, a gentle asking why the behavior might be showing up, um, and not in a judgmental or demanding way, but in a really caring way, can make a whole difference. So, as we discussed, my fawning behavior back in the day, that meant I've worked a 38-hour day, probably more than once. I've worked 133-hour work weeks regularly. I've worked without a day off for 5 months, maybe longer. And not once did somebody ask me why. And if they'd had, it would have kept me from burnout, the chronic illnesses that I still deal with today. Instead, what they asked me is, and this is not a lie, why can't you be the good Anita all the time? Because the good Anita makes all of us better. And in short, they were saying, when you're good, our bad behavior is less. Despite the physical and mental health issues I was dealing with because of that bad behavior, despite the coworkers who they had pitted against me, who were dealing with what they call tall poppy syndrome and trying to cut me down, had they asked the compassionate why, I'm certain the good Anita would have been there every day or almost every day because I am, despite those robotic tendencies to work 24 hours a day, a human being. So I hope that answered the question on that. If not, please drop a line in there. The other thing with the compassionate why and that simple shift is it's the start of trauma awareness and trauma advocacy. And advocacy for these changes, for policies and practices that create the healthy soil from which, again, well-being programs, employee engagement, internal and external brand reputation, profit goals, and healthy change can take root, really just requires some simple things: empathy, adaptability, clarity, and collaboration. We talked a little bit about change and change management. Like I said, we need to slow down. We need to slow down. We're seeing this play out and the damage that it's causing every day in the last few months. Measured and meaningful change will net you the results you want, ones that can be adopted and assimilated, not having to be moved on from because that didn't work and we got to try the next new thing that caught our attention. And it's definitely better than chaotic action. After the first glimmer, we need to have those hard conversations with ourselves and acknowledge where the real root issue is. This is pulling back the covers and really examining ourselves and our policies and procedures. From there, we can champion and be the advocates for the change we desire through trauma-informed and inclusive stakeholder engagement and really meeting employees where they're at, whether they are a role model for the change we're expecting or they are completely against the change and complete reticence. And then finally, in what I call the first initial stage, which is these first couple of bubbles, we must create, both in our policies and procedures and when we want change, clear agreements that everybody is committed to. They have to be focused. They have to be all I's dotted and T's crossed. They have to be measurable. they have to consider the 7 agreements, and they have to be upheld, and those who don't hold those commitments need to be held accountable. So with that, I know we are very close to the end. I want to open it up to more conversation and more questions. I couldn't cover everything today. Um, I would love your feedback because your feedback is what makes me better and me able to share this story in a better way. So please, if you wouldn't mind connecting with the link or the QR code. I had never known about Talkadot before until I joined Innovation Women a couple of years ago. So this is my first time using it, and I'm really excited for your feedback. Please drop any questions. And then with that, because I couldn't cover everything today, I wanted to share with you some resources. So there is a new book on this topic that I just released about a month ago. You can use the QR codes below. If you use Amazon, that's the one on the left. I also have ability for a few more signed copies. And with that, you get the strengths deck. That's the code on the right. And then I've just launched the Safe and Sound Workplace Alliance, which is a community of practice and learning. There's courses, there's tools, there's resources, there's one-on-ones with me, and regular meetings, depending on what you pick. And for the incredible group of Lioness members here, we sorry, I have created a major discount for you on the membership. The code is 0321. Sorry about that.
All right. Thank you so much, Anita. Like you said, we are very, very close to the end of time. Let's see if we can get through a couple of questions in the last 5 minutes or so. Um, First up, what's a good way to start these conversations with my team, especially if I'm expecting pushback?
Yeah. Um, Pushback's going to happen because change scares people. I think it's being vulnerable. I think it's explaining why. One of the things you'll get, I think they just dropped it in here, is the business case. So I have a pre-made presentation that I'm providing you today that has even more of the statistics that I provided today in here. Using that presentation to help explain why this is an important discussion is a great point, especially for being able to see the impact both to the people and the bottom line. There's often people who can't see that they're interconnected. So that business case document hopefully is a great starting point for you.
Fantastic. Yes, tons of resources for everybody.
And the book has a
Yeah,
whole stakeholder engagement tool set in there for you as well, as does the membership.
perfect. Right. Another question. So, how can I balance being, a compassionate leader while also needing to set boundaries and meet business goals? How should I meet with employees who seem to be really struggling?
Okay. So I'll take both of those. I think having those policies and procedures in place and understanding the interconnectedness creates that balance. Um, we do have business goals. Business is a real thing. Not many people are showing the both and of this. At least that's what I'm hearing from people who are engaging with me in the work. We either see the people and the well-being side of it, or we see the profit side. I don't think they're mutually exclusive. So I think when you undertake one, the other will improve if done correctly. And then the second part of that question, Laura.
Yeah. How should I meet with employees who seem to be really struggling?
Yeah. I think first and foremost, we need to remember we are not therapists, we are not clinicians, we are not here to fix broken people. Trauma informed work is not about fixing broken people, it is about creating the environment where our humanity can show up. I think there's a lot around just being vulnerable. Um, I don't know that there shouldn't be a code for membership. That link takes you right to a special page for Lioness people. So if you just pick one of those, that should do what you need. I tried to make it sound, um, but vulnerability about your own struggles and your own humanity, and having, while we need those strong policies and procedures, we have to have some flexibility to allow for people's individual experiences.
Perfect. All right, we are just at time. So, Anita, is there anything else you want to leave the audience with before we close out for today?
I'm here. If I believe, did we drop my LinkedIn? Let me drop my LinkedIn really quick. That's the best way to connect with me. And I, reach out if you have questions, if you have an organization that needs some support, please reach out. I am extremely passionate about creating this change in the world. And so I want to do what I can to help.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Anita. And thank you,
Thank you,
everyone, for
everyone.
coming. Keep an eye
Thank
out for the
you.
recording, and we'll see you next time. Bye bye.
Okay. Thank you.